Okay, good.
Hi, this is Barry, and welcome to Simplicity Zen. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you could take a moment to hit subscribe, the alert button, and like the video, I'd really appreciate it. It helps motivate YouTube to spread the webcast to a wider audience. If you're listening to one of the on one of the podcast apps, you could subscribe through that app. You could also go to simplicityzen.com and subscribe to the mailing list there. We also have contact information for myself, and people have increasingly been contacting me about these episodes, and I love discussing them with people. So definitely feel motivated to reach out to me. Today, my guest is Guogu. He's a Chan teacher, author, and Buddhist scholar. He's the founder and teacher at the Tallahassee Chan Center, and he's professor of religion at Florida State University. He is the Dharma heir of Sheng Yen. Thanks so much for being here today with us.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Before we dive in too deeply, could you tell us about the Tallahassee Chan Center? Is it, for example, maybe it looks like it's a physical center. Is it residential? Is it mostly lay people? Do you have ordained monks and nuns there? Like that kind of stuff? Will you just kind of give us the scope of what the Tallahassee Chan Center is itself?
Okay.
Yeah.
The Tallahassee Chan Center is in Tallahassee, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And the beautiful name Tallahassee translates to Chinese as the city of pagodas. The actual characters that they use.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And the actual character that people use for Florida is Fozhou, which in translation is province of the Buddhas. So we're in the city of pagodas in the province of the Buddhas. So this center was built. We had it renovated, we purchased it. Basically, just left the four walls standing. The roof came off, everything. We built the whole center in 2017. That's my dedication to my teacher. So he does have a Chinese name too. My teacher's name is Sheng Yen, John Master Sheng Yen. In translation, it's holy adornment. So in Chinese, I call it. I'm the only one who's calling it Sheng Yen Chan Yuan, which is the Chan cloister of holy adornment. This center is basically a city center. Even though we're in the middle of the city, we have 5 acres and grass, and Tallahassee itself is a lot of greens, so a lot of big trees and so on. So coming to here is like an oasis a little bit. We have a big yard. It is a city center, so we do intensive retreats, weekly sittings, weekend sittings, but it's not a residential. Every once in a while, when we're not doing retreats, some of my students from out of town come and just stay for a month or longer or short term even. So they would stay at the retreat house. We usually house the retreatants. So being a city center, there's no residence. It's basically a lay center catered to the Tallahassee, but during retreat times, people come from all over the place, from Europe too. So that's the genesis of this Tallahassee Chan Center, reason for its existence. The kind of programs here. Is there anything else you'd like to know about the center?
Yeah, the programs, and I maybe a little bit about how you guys raised the funds for it. Did you have some generous benefactors? Was it kind of grassroots donations? Yeah, because I imagine that was quite capital intensive to develop initially.
Yeah. Well, before this, we started 2009 at a rental place in this art park. So we just started saving money. The
Mhm.
art park its character changed. It became more commercial and so on. So they started not giving us um, long leases. So
Mhm.
we're thinking, okay, probably they're going to be kicking us out. So it's
Mhm.
a lot of renovation. The buildings are coming down. So we're like, okay, we got to start saving money.
Mhm.
So the seed money really came from a lecture series that I did
Mhm.
in Taiwan when I was there
Mhm.
visiting.
Mhm.
Just like a 4 day teaching on Chan and so on. And afterwards, someone cut a check out to me for an equivalent to $40,000 US.
That's great.
So I was like, who is this person? Is this real? We went to cash it. It's real. So I thought, okay, this will be the seed money. And then when word got around that I want to uh, create a center in Tallahassee
Mhm.
dedicated to my teacher,
Mhm.
and many of my teachers' patrons supported it. But we also got a lot from kind of grassroots,
Mhm.
because everyone's a volunteer here, including
Mhm.
myself. So I don't take anything here.
Mhm.
So my salary come from Florida State University. So
Mhm.
just so in a relatively short time, we raised a lot of money,
That's
and
great.
the retreats, people just the locals just donate the food, so we don't have to buy food. You know we just save a lot of money. We don't have that
Mhm.
much expenditure.
Mhm.
So in a short time, we're able to raise a lot of money. Yeah, and that's how it came to be.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, have you ever been to the city of 10,000 Buddhas in central, kind of Northern California?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that has always surprised me of that place, it's, so your center is a Chan Center, whereas that seemed more like generically Buddhist, and there's a lot of chanting and the circular chanting, and I love Chinese sutra chanting. I think it's the most beautiful of all the ones I've encountered. But so and there's a lot of uh, you know um, uh, it's the Mittaba Buddha. I don't know if worship is the right word, but kind of chanting, for hope and rebirth in the Pure Land. Do your guys' practice have any aspects of that, or is it more kind of narrowly focused on Chan?
Mm. So different places, Master Xuan Hua
Mm-hmm.
founded the city of 10,000 Buddhas.
Mm-hmm.
He was a Chan master.
Mm-hmm.
But Chan, you see, the version of Chan that went to Japan in the 12th, 13th century
Mm-hmm.
was the Song Dynasty version of Chan,
Mm-hmm.
whereas the Japan kind of institutionalized that form and
Mm-hmm.
kept it. Uh, in China, it kept on evolving, you see.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time we're talking about 15th, 16th century,
Mm-hmm.
it has integrated to chanting of Amitabha's name,
Mm-hmm.
even koan, huatou practices
Mm-hmm.
um, began to integrate Amitabha.
Mm-hmm.
First, you develop concentration, and then once you reach kind of single-minded,
Mm-hmm.
you ask who's reciting the Buddha's name. So he's of that lineage, like the current Chinese Buddhism,
Mm-hmm.
Han Chinese Buddhism, is really can be traced back to about late Ming Dynasty, about 16, 15th, 16th century form. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so in that sense, it's kind of a you know generic kind of Chinese Buddhism,
Mm-hmm.
whereas the teacher happened to teach Chan, but
Mm-hmm.
the audience is of City of 10,000 Buddha is really geared towards just general Chinese devotees, many of which practice Pure Land recitation and so on. So they do hold Chan retreats, but in order for that place to survive, to sustain itself, they really depend on the Chinese community. Some of them practice Chan, some of them not so. Whereas the Tallahassee Chan Center, it's like 98% Westerners, English speakers. Like besides myself, maybe one, sometimes two other East Asians. We broadly extend Asian to India, Southeast Asia, maybe 5 or 10, so it's, and then the rest of it would be native English speakers, African American descent and Caucasian and Latinx, so it's quite diverse, but not too diverse in terms of Chinese audience here.
Right.
So we're part of the Dharma Drum lineage that my teacher established. He has many different chapters. So this is like the only chapter that's really catered to Americans or Westerners. The rest of the chapters are Chan, focused on Chan, but Chinese practitioners. Mainly.
It's centered in Taiwan, is that correct?
The headquarters is in Taiwan, Dharma Drum Mountain. It's a mountain site. It has monastic complex, also educational, because my teacher, besides being a Chan master, he was also an academic too. So he has the Buddhist Institute there.
So I know you've been to Japan. Have you ever visited an Obaku temple?
I haven't been to Obaku.
Yeah.
Temple. Really, just Soto Zen and Rinzai.
Yeah.
Rinzai in the Myoshinji line.
Yeah. What made me ask, because I know that was a branch of Japanese Zen that came much later and includes more of what would be considered, more contemporary type Chan practice.
Exactly. That came during the time that I was talking about, 16th century. So that form, that's why Obaku incorporated, different chanting style and recitation.
It's interesting. I'm really interested in that history of Japanese Zen. And a lot of the reform movements that came in that time seem to get their genesis in the Obaku teachers coming to the United States and to Japan, and being like, what are you guys doing? And that kind of like, so, a lot of like Mankai and Hakuen and, Minzen and Monzen and, because, Soto, they did a huge reformation of how they do their Dharma transmission around that time too. And that was all driven by, Obaku seeming more authentic and, and so forth. So there's normally at this stage of the interview, I would start asking you kind of about your history. So you've done a 2-part study interview with the excellent podcast Guru Viking, and so I'm actually going to recommend people go and listen to that, and I'll link to it in the text of that I put when I put this up. So I don't want to spend too much time on your history, but could you talk maybe just like 5 minutes, like a really brief outline of kind of the major themes of your practice history and how you got here, just so people have context for the rest of the questions that we ask, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure, of course. Yeah, I'd love to. So I was born in Taiwan, 1968. And into a Buddhist family. Not exactly like ordinary, like once a year go to the temple kind of Buddhist family. It was kind of a practice, Buddhist family, tied to this particular ascetic meditation. I don't want to call him Chan. Although in the Chinese, Chan and meditation, sometimes there's not too much distinction. So he was a Chan master of sort in terms of ascetic practice of intensive meditation, solitary retreat, and so on. So I learned meditation when I was 4. In his temple, running around, and he was really taken with this master. And I migrated to my family. I migrated to the United States when I was 10. And then, my mom wanted to, so my mom, my brother, and I, 3 of us. So my mom wanted to, of course, look for another teacher, Chan, meditation. And then someone recommended my root teacher, Chan Master Sheng Yen. Now, prior to that, meditation was just kind of fun. And I really liked doing it because that made my first teacher really happy every time he saw me sit. His name is Guangqing. Guangqing. I just really, love running around the temple, being with him, and playing around and with the monks. And most of my childhood memories actually at his temple, strangely, like very early. And so when we came here, then I really to the United States, in New York, I began to saw meditation from a different light. Meeting Master Sheng Yen. At that time, New Jersey, New York, Sunday matinee, basically those kung fu films, with the mouth moving, not matching the dub over, those kind of kung fu movies. So I was really into martial arts and so on. So my teacher, Master Sheng Yen, kind of tricked me into meditation. He says, I'm going to teach you how to do this particular kind of kung fu. It's kind of jumping through walls. It's called light feet. So I was like, great, I'm going to learn that. And then, but he made me go through a one-day retreat when I was around 10. And it was a sleepover retreat, and we would sit. He would give teachings and different forms, different methods, and walking meditation, sitting meditation. So it was kind of a beginner's meditation workshop, but in a retreat setting. And then I discovered different aspects of meditation. I understood what it was about, stealing the mind, cultivating the mind. Of course, kids before 10, 11 years old, they don't have abstract thinking. That's why in the Buddhist tradition, like from Shakyamuni Buddha, his own son, Rahula, told Shariputra to teach him meditation when he's like reaching around 10, 11. Because kids, they can't really distinguish abstract thinking, meaning they can't distinguish between wandering thought and method. Like there's no distinction. The mind wandering, they're just wandering. The mind thinking of this, they just become that. So around that time, I understood what's wandering thought. You're supposed to bring it back. The method, and but still, I was just a kid, wild, untamed, So our relationship began. Kind of saw me grow up. Every week I would go there, and the adults would have classes. Sometimes I would join. Sometimes I would just be upstairs in the Queens Chan Center, doing my own thing, reading and drawing pictures of the Buddha on the blackboard. And I really got into it when I was 17, 18 years old. So from 10 to 17, 18 was just part of my upbringing, my identity,
Mm-hmm.
but I had all kinds of other things that's part of my identity, music, singing, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And but towards the end, I started to. It was because the music scene. I got into straight edge, hardcore punk music,
Mm-hmm.
skinheads. Of course, the New York skinheads are not like Great Britain, Doc Martens with like white supremacy, that kind of skinhead.
Right.
New York skinheads are Puerto Ricans, blacks, white, and all kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And many of us would go to the Hare Krishnas for free food.
Mm-hmm.
And as the people so there was a close relationship. Many Hare Krishnas were skinheads, ex-skinheads. So during that time, like I got into it when I was 14. During these years, as people kind of gravitated to the kind of spiritual tradition of Hare Krishna, I began to look back to my own root. And 17, 18, I started to do retreats with my teacher.
Yeah. If I can interject real quick, I'm curious, when you would perform live, looking back at it now, do you feel like the music kind of generated like a samadhi type state in you, or a flow state or anything like that?
I think it's a kind of transcendence
Mm-hmm.
on multiple levels.
Mm-hmm.
On the one level, we were marginalized from society.
Mm-hmm.
We were the underdogs. So it was a kind of camaraderie,
Mm-hmm.
and we were looking for something.
Mm-hmm.
And in the mosh pit, slam dancing, diving off stage, and just that age range of energy, it was a kind of transcendence. You were supported by this subculture, and you're able to express out. So it's a kind of, on that level, it's a kind of the level, kind of the physicality of the music, the energy was a kind of flow, especially the slam dancing part, the diving off stage and so on. But there's the other dimension too, of this community. And in New York City, CBGB's A7, these two main clubs with the Hare Krishnas. So it's, we always get food there, and it's kind of spiritual, and it's kind of all mixed together, And then I started to look back into my own tradition. And of course, the Hare Krishna would chant. That's their samadhi, chant, and sing. And so it wasn't regular punk. So I was part of the straight edge punk, which is
no drugs,
alcohol, no drugs, and so on. And the boundary between the Hare Krishna and some of the punk bands, this particular punk band, Youth of Today, they were Hare Krishna skinheads, So, and the lyrics, they kind of blurred the boundaries a little bit, and so the ethics, if there is one, the ethics of this straight edge hardcore was kind of in alignment with this countercultural,
totally, yeah,
even counter punk, stream. So that kind of prepped the ground for me to inspire me to explore deeper.
Did you ever
during retreats?
Yeah. Did you ever encounter Minor Threat, the band Minor Threat back then?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, they were my favorite. Yeah, I love them so much. They're so good.
My recent birthday, he sent me a note with out of step, the black sheep, white sheep. It's like, through a friend, So it was nice.
It's great.
Happy birthday. I was like, what? Yeah.
Did you know them personally back then? Or
I didn't know them personally, but
They were around the
mirrored.
scene.
They were on the scene. They're kind of DC, what kind of New York
Yeah.
skinheads. They're kind
Yeah.
of DC skinhead. There was a little rivalry there,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But it was all good. We're kids.
Yeah.
He was a little older. He was a
Mhm.
little older than us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I started doing retreats 17, 18, and never looked back. So
Mhm.
after college,
Mhm.
uh,
Can I ask you, so when you first started, so at that age, when you went back and started working with your teacher, what kind of practices did he assign to you?
working with the breath,
Hmm.
traditional breath,
Hmm.
and but he taught at that time silent illumination.
Hmm.
The Japanese would pronounce it mokusho zen.
Hmm.
Dogen descriptively named it shikantaza.
Hmm.
You know,
Could you give a
referencing.
formal definition of silent illumination? I know you have a whole book on it, but if just a real brief formal definition of silent illumination from your perspective, from your tradition's perspective, because you know I think if you grabbed 100 different Zen people in America, you'd get 100 different definitions of silent illumination. So like I'd kind of like to hear what you feel is the formal kind of definition of it from your tradition's perspective.
I don't know it's formal, but
Or
my
yeah,
definition of it.
yeah.
Silent illumination describes the essence and function of mind,
Hmm.
of awakening, really.
Hmm.
So, you know, the aspect of being with ourself, that's
Hmm.
basically the silent part,
Hmm.
metaphorically. Yep, but it's not void or vacuity. We live in
Hmm.
a world. So the
Hmm.
responsive part, the interaction, the connection part,
Hmm.
that's metaphorically called illumination.
Hmm.
So, silent illumination really is the awakened mind,
Hmm.
awakened heart. You know, manifested in real life situation
Hmm.
is being in the world, responding without
Hmm.
self-referencing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
In contemporary American Zen, there's definitely a contingent of practitioners who feel that and spoken in the terms of you know shikantaza, that from a relative perspective, every moment of shikantaza is awakened activity, right? And there and kind of the what's both implicit and explicit about that is that an awakening experience, or an awakening shift, maybe more appropriately, is not something of importance. But if you actually look back to the Caodong, am I pronouncing that right? The
操动.
Caodong practitioners, you look at their biographical entries in the lamp records. These people have all had both preliminary and then final awakenings,
Yeah.
despite practicing and popularizing silent illumination. So I'm curious, from your tradition's perspective, I don't want to say gradual, but I mean, do you think, I'll say gradual. I mean, do you think practice can be gradual and like an organic unfolding of Buddha nature, or do you think that sudden shift of awakened perception is important or even necessary? Like what would be your perspective on that?
Yeah. From the Chan perspective, we're already free,
Hmm.
but people don't feel free.
Hmm.
So hence the unfolding of practice.
Hmm.
So when Dogen says, practice awakening one,
Hmm.
that's a perspective from the standpoint of awakening.
Hmm.
Right? from the standpoint of practice, it's a correct view only. So hence a lot of Soto Zen practitioners, they develop faith, or they kind of integrate this correct view to counteract the proliferation, habit, tendency of enlightened, not enlightened, having, lacking, wanting. So to kind of counteract this kind of polarizing ways of thinking, right? So the correct view has that function. But for someone who is experientially not awakened, to think that that person is awakened, like oneself is awakened, it's just not practical. Right? There's a difference between perspective, because from the perspective of how we actually experience things, vexations, the whole Buddhist project is very important to recognize, to be able to identify greed, hatred, ignorance. That's the 3 points. If you can't even discern that, just sitting is awakening, awakened activity. Yeah, it is, but it's from the awakened view. An awakened person can say that. For the unawakened, they take that as a correct view to aspire to kind of embody, learn to integrate, to counteract the polarizing dualistic mind only. Right? So it is both. From Chan's perspective, definitely the embodied experiencing of awakening. Sometimes it lasts a moment. Those in the Chan tradition, at least in our tradition, doesn't really count. Just kind of glimpse it, doesn't really count. Real substantial ones, kind of days, weeks, months, So definitely, extremely important. But it's not something we can contrive, kind of seek after. Definitely not. Right? So the most important part is just a practice to work with vexations, to counteract those polarizing tendencies, having, lacking, greed, hatred, delusion, awakening, just to transform this kind of this way of thinking, integrating the correct view. But when you catch yourself thinking like that, okay, let it go, drop it. Right? These wandering thoughts, right? So gradual, sudden, this kind of language, this kind of language is from the perspective of the unenlightened. Right? We can't confuse the two. Right? In the actual working end of practice, we're dealing with vexations. We have to align ourselves with precepts. We have to cultivate concentration. We have to cultivate compassion. Right? So from that perspective, there's delusion, definitely. And there's awakening. And there's gradual. And there's sudden. From the awakened perspective, you're already free. Right? It's like it's like a person trying to say, how does one become a human being? That person just deserves a slap. You're already a human being, But that person doesn't believe it. I'm an ordinary, I'm vexed. That's all they ever know. Wandering thoughts, greed, and jealousy, and hatred, and all that. That's all they know. So they don't know they're a human being. Well, from the teacher's perspective, someone who's have embodied experiencing, yes, to satisfy, to relate to them, to connect to them. Yes, you should practice this. You practice this. Practice this. But really, you're already free.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you could say, or the way I like to conceptualize it is, sure, you're already awakened, but you can only see that in retrospect. Like from the awakened perspective. That's it's so in the Platform Sutra, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. They make a big point of the equality of prajna and samadhi. Do you feel that falls within the same category? That's something that's only clear from an awakened perspective, or do you think samadhi prior to awakening still, from a relative perspective, still contains prajna?
The Platform Sutra speaks from the perspective of awakening.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So its interpretation of samadhi and prajna is not the ordinary, sequential. You observe precepts, and you cultivate samadhi, and maybe wisdom will come later. So in the sutra, Huinan, or the authors of Platform Sutra, gives an analogy of the lamp. Lamp. Back then, it's just oil lamp. So you can't really separate luminosity from the fire, from the flame. Kind of like inseparable, right? So the luminosity is prajna. The flame is samadhi. You can't say where one ends and where the other one begins. Inseparable. So that's from the perspective of awakening. Just like we can't really say, where the essence of who we are and the function of wisdom, like silent illumination, you can't really distinguish which part is silence. Selflessness, emptiness. Emptiness just means relationship. So in that relationship, already empty of a reified, fixed point self. Just connections. From a temporal perspective, from a spatial perspective. From a temporal perspective, it just means, the Chan Platform Sutra lingo, non-abiding, which is just Chinese way of saying impermanence, which is just another way of saying freshness. Every moment is a new beginning. So Platform Sutra come from that angle. So it's very important to develop this correct view. Because if we don't have this correct view, then what do we have? Then we fall back on what we always know in our life, which is having, lacking. I'm deluded now, and I hope to be awakened later. So you practice based on this not so accurate of how things actually are view, then the result is not so accurate. It doesn't really lead anywhere. But if one has this view, this correct view, then it's almost like one has a standard through which one can integrate in light of the things that what's present within us, to catch this kind of polarizing thought and use methods to dismantle that, to diminish that. So Chan Zen is a very different approach. The correct view is a little bit different than, say, South Asian Buddhism. It's similar to the Tibetan, right? The Mahamudra, Dzogchen, it's similar. They have that view already free, in their own way, spoken in their own way. So that's the kind of distinction. So yes, we're already free, but we deal with vexations. The benefit of this is when you deal with vexations,
Mm-hmm.
the ups and downs of the turmoils and the difficulties we encounter. With that correct view, the whole relationship to vexations, poisons the mind, changes.
Mm-hmm.
So greed, hatred, ignorance, they no longer really define you. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just something we have to work with. That's why Chan Zen practitioners, wandering thoughts, the relationship to wandering thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
it's fine. It's not like you gotta kill that, get rid of that in order to get this.
Mm-hmm.
So that whole orientation shifts. You see?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if a person doesn't have this kind of outlook to practice, has an outlook that of we live in samsara,
Mm-hmm.
I gotta get rid of samsara in order to experience nirvana,
Mm-hmm.
then the whole relationship to one's own wandering thoughts, drowsiness, vexations, habit tendency, it's
Mm-hmm.
very different. The whole
Mm-hmm.
attitude is that of it's driven by having, lacking,
Mm-hmm.
existence, non-existence.
Mm-hmm.
So so the Platform Sutra is one of the earliest texts that kind of set the standards for
Mm-hmm.
the Chan Song Zen way of practicing
Yeah.
spiritual practice.
When you're talking about the relationship between awakened wisdom and or awakened perspective and vexations, it makes me think of Dogen's quote where he says, I'm probably going to mess this up. It's Buddhas are awakened about delusion, where ordinary people are deluded about awakening. I think I messed that up, but that's the gist of it. It's like I remember when I first encountered that, that really hit home to me. Like, yeah.
There's a line of that in the Platform Sutra.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Dogen, in one of his writings, Dogen hated the phrase "seeing true nature" or "seeing nature," and some people have quoted that out of context to say that Dogen didn't believe in awakening, but which obviously isn't true. But he did very specifically. He hated seeing nature. Kensho. He didn't like that term, and because he felt like it was that it included too much dualism, because seeing, there's somebody seeing something, but and part of his argument against that was he's like, well, the Platform Sutra, it's made up anyway. It's not historical. I always thought it was interesting that even in the medieval times there was some sense that some things may not be historical. So in your training, and I'm gonna, I apologize in advance, I'm gonna use Japanese terms for this. Were you ever given koan practice, like keyword phrase practice? Was that part of your training at all?
Yes. My teacher was heir to both the Caodong tradition and the Lingji tradition. So in the Dharma Drum lineage, we practice both. Maybe at different phases of one's practice, training career, but we practice both. Could you go into some detail about the phases of practicing, like at what point is someone doing silent illumination? At what point is somebody doing, I'm going to use the Japanese terms, apologize. Koan practice, are one of them pre and post first glimpse of awakening, or, what is kind of the path there, the practice path? Okay. So most people begin with working with the breath. That's kind of a segue into practice. And even before that, if a person is really tense, they usually work on relaxing, to become more in tune with the body. Most people are out of tune with the body. The bodies tend to don't even know it. Tension with the body come from a shift in one's thinking or wandering thoughts or something. So most people are probably not not too in tune with it. So people immediately learn to be more in tune with the body. So we have yoga exercises besides Hing, walking meditation, to have a more embodied, more grounded kind of beginning as a foundation. So my teacher developed these various forms of yoga stretching type of practices.
Any qigong mixed in there? No.
More like stretching exercises for kung fu.
Okay.
But mixed with hatha yoga.
Okay.
That's suitable for practitioners. So he targets the ones that are suitable for practitioners. So these embodied practices, be more in tune with the body. Then one begin with the breath. After the breath, then one can take one or two possible avenues. It's not one is pre, one is post necessarily. So depending on the person's own affinity, some people just begin with silent illumination. Other people begin with huatou. So the teacher kind of work with the student, come to know the student, potential, and so on. So, and then after some time, usually years, decades, then the person maybe switch to the other one. Right? Between that, there may be some back and forth, between silent illumination or huatou. The Japanese is wato, which is different than koan. But generally, that's the trajectory. So, for example, I practice silent illumination after the breath, probably like something like 16, 17 years. And then my teacher says, okay, now you do huatou.
Do you remember what wato he assigned you initially?
Yeah. You want to know?
Yeah.
All things return to one. What is the one return to?
Yeah.
Right? Because this oneness is very prominent in different stages, in various forms of silent illumination. So that was like very appropriate. So that was my first one.
In Japanese derived traditions, you have what we would call the Hoshin or breakthrough koan, which and then really from there, I mean, there's different permutations, but in generally, like subsequent koans are for exploring that breakthrough and deepening it. What is the relationship between absolute and relative and so forth? Like where does the one go to? That's very much a relationship between relative and absolute style koan. What, at least in our tradition. And I'm curious, do you guys have an analog in yours? Like, is there a koan curriculum or like that that you're expected to kind of go through, or is it just whatever your teacher feels like you need at that moment? Like, I'm curious, how does that work for your guys' tradition?
The quick answer is no, there's no curriculum. The more elaborate answer is actually within Chan historically. One of the greatest advocates of huatou practice was Dahui Zonggao. His teacher, Yuan Wu Keqing, was the commentator, compiler of the Blue Cliff Record. And he broke away from that tradition because he was just getting very, very literary. And Yuan Wu's comments in the Blue Cliff Records were literary. And in Da Hui's time, people start to memorize those responses of the capping phrases. So the emergence of Huatou practice was actually a critique, a very strong critique of Gong'an tradition. And during that time, already in the Song Dynasty, 12th century, people were developing which Gong'an is essence, which Gong'an is more focused on function, which one is, and Da Hui just dismantled all of that because that from this Huatou tradition, it's intellectualizing it. It's putting things in containers, in containers. Maybe it's part of Da Hui's personality, but he did not like containers, you know, and he challenged that. He burned his own teachers' woodblock prints, lithographs to Blue Cliff Record, and it was revived only over 100 years later, you know. So, but the Japanese Rinzai Zen tradition got that format at the peak of the Chinese Gong'an tradition, in which you know, developing all that different stages, different time, and they institutionalize it. And later on, so they got maybe 12th, 13th century, and they really soaked it up, right? Da Hui's practice and influence didn't really start influencing Japan until centuries later, I think.
Yeah.
You know, so it's kind of different trajectory. You know? And then when Hakuin revitalized the Rinzai Zen tradition, and it was really his disciples that kind of really institutionalized into curriculums. But from a Chan perspective, it's not something that one would want to do even.
Yeah. This is a digression, and I apologize, but I just can't help but nerd out about this a little bit. I would. Have you ever read a book called Soto Zen in Medieval Japan? I think.
Bodiford.
Yeah. Right.
William Bodiford. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was really interested in that book. You know, he has a whole section on koans in Soto practice, and I was really surprised to learn that at that point in Soto practice in Japan, they had koan curriculums, and to get Dharma transmission, you needed to complete that koan curriculum. It's a little vague of what that meant, you know, how those koans were worked on, but a system of koan progression definitely predated Hakuin and his disciples, you know, and in both, not just in Rinzai, but in Soto too. It's really interesting. I think that's an area where I'd love to see more scholarly research, because it's not totally clear what was happening there. But we do know that there were koan curriculums prior to Hakuin in both schools.
Yeah. That's what I was saying. You know, they preserve the Song Dynasty, the Southern Song Dynasty version of that, developing different containers for different cases, koan cases. And it was actually Japanese Soto Zen that first introduced that, not Rinzai. So they're the one who came up with secret transmissions. So how they practiced it was different. It's kind of like capping phrases. You know?
Kirigami, I think they called it. Right?
Yeah, it was tied to different koans, but then it was tied to sectarian affiliation, also tied to institutions like actual physical temples. And Japan had to dismantle that, because later on, when different Soto abbots were moved to different monasteries with different lineages,
they'd have to redo their transmission.
They gotta redo all that stuff. Yeah. So I'm in the process of editing a scholarly volume
Mm-hmm.
centered around Mumonkan,
Oh.
gateless barrier.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the scholars that I have contributing to this volume, she will be talking about that that period, 14th,
Oh.
15th century, to
Yeah.
flesh it out more.
I'm looking. I'm looking. What's the general publication timeframe for that? Do you think?
Tentatively 2023, maybe end of 2023, beginning of 24.
Well, I'll keep my eye out for that.
Yeah,
Right.
I'll
Very
let you
much
know.
looking forward to it. So my next question. Oh, did we cover the general trajectory of the training path in your lineage? You know, do they come together to?
Yeah.
Once they come together, what would be the subsequent training, or is it more just working closely with your teacher without a curriculum of any sort or path or?
Because these are methods of practice.
Mm-hmm.
So the coming together really is a familiarization of
Mm-hmm.
methods
Mm-hmm.
and learning of the different capacity of students. It's like learning the scenery. You come through this house, through the front door.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're gonna come through the window. Come through the back door.
Mm-hmm.
So different ways of entering this house. So
Mm-hmm.
familiarizing oneself with that
Mm-hmm.
for the sake of helping people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah.
Do you, at any point in the kind of the normative practice path of a Chan monk, is there any like formal studies of the precepts or sutras or anything like that?
Yeah, the Chan tradition is inseparable from the larger Chinese Buddhist tradition.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, monastic
Mm-hmm.
tradition. It's only in later time, a lot of lay people began to practice. So
Mm-hmm.
precept, we have recitations, studies. Yeah, it's all integrated.
Mm-hmm.
Chan, I would say, depend on the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
You know. Are you getting the echo?
I heard some kind of like electronic fuzziness.
All right, so hopefully that will go away. So depend on the teacher, really.
Mm-hmm.
Like Master Sheng Yen, he was very well read,
Mm-hmm.
very familiar with the scriptures. He didn't make us study the scriptures,
Mm-hmm.
basically practice Chan. But
Mm-hmm.
because we're his disciples, on our free time, we would study the scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
And once in a while, he would give classes on key Mahayana texts.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like formal study.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't really, stress it. We will have a lot of Chan retreats. That's the anchor
Mm-hmm.
that kind of anchored our lineage throughout
Mm-hmm.
the year. So
Mm-hmm.
the formal studies kind of feels like it's really organic. He will give classes, but it's really
Mm-hmm.
up to the individual. Some people are into early text. Other people are like early text means the agamas, the nikayas. Some
Mm-hmm.
people are into yogacara. Some people are into Tathagata Garbha. Some people are into Lotus Sutra. So
Mm-hmm.
he will give classes on some of them, and it's really up to the individual on their separate time to go deep into that and their study groups and whatnot. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Um, so you're so I noticed you received Inca at a relatively young age, and then you received subsequent Incas as as time went on. In which is differs from the normative Japanese. In America, it's kind of got to the point where sometimes they'll break, like in White Plum in particular. There'll be Denkai, which is transmitting the precepts, then Denbo, which is transmitting the lineage, and that kind of equates to like assistant teacher, and fully transmitted. And then at least in White Plum, then they'll have actually Inka, which is like your it's maybe more of an institutional designation. You're an established teacher. We're designating you as an elder, type of thing.
Yeah.
But for the most part, transmission is kind of transmission, even though they kind of do it steps. I'm curious, what do the different Incas mean in your tradition, and like, could you just explain what? Maybe just talk in general about like what is teacher certification in your lineage certification in your tradition, and how that works, and how that related to your multiple Inca, attainments or whatever.
So Inca is a Chinese word. Inka. Inka is used to recognize seeing self nature. That's different than Dharma transmission.
Okay.
The institutionalization of Inka, 传法, Denbo, in the Japanese pronunciation, it's really, really loose. It's really, really loose. Since the Song Dynasty all the way up to the present, really. Sometimes there's a conflation between transmission of position, abbotship, with transmission of Dharma, because sometimes you have to get transmission of Dharma in order to be the abbot. So every tradition, for the hundreds of years since the 12th century, probably mean it differently. So there is no formal institutionalization, an agreement on that.
Is that true even within Dharma Drum?
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, in the way my teacher had specific meaning in his mind when he used these terms. I'll give you one example. Some people have Dharma transmission, but they don't have Inka. They never receive Inka. Now you would think, what could that be? Because Dharma transmission from our tradition is just passing on of obligation. Okay, you've done this service for the center. You're going to be stationed in this monastery or this region. So it's kind of like taking on the responsibility. And that interpretation is not Master Sheng Yen's invention. Even in early Chan, that's always been the case. Before the advent of paper certificate, there's all that stuff. It's really Dharma transmission is really like taking on the burden of this lineage, taking on responsibility. And the criteria for that is, solid foundation in virtue, correct view in practice. This is how my teacher interpreted. A stable personality, congruent, right? And great conviction, great compassion to benefit others. It doesn't say anything about seeing oneself nature. Right? So, out of all the Dharma transmission recipients, very small percentage people have, realistically, have had the experience of seeing oneself nature. Conversely, those people who have received Inka, which he defined as seeing self nature, awakening, he used to use it a little loosely, like shallow states, like glimpses and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But later on, he found that a lot of people who have had the experience,
Mm-hmm.
they backslide all the time,
Mm-hmm.
break precept and all that. So he became more careful later.
Mm-hmm.
He just congratulated them for those flashes, but
Mm-hmm.
he reserved inka for people who have substantial sense of nature.
Mm-hmm.
So what I was saying is, curiously, probably from outsider perspective, many people who have, or I should say, among the people who have experienced confirmation, seal of approval. That's what the literal translation is, seal of approval or awakening. Don't have Dharma transmissions, for whatever reason, for whatever reason.
Does that limit them from being able to have students and pass on the lineage?
Yeah, sometimes the student don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
They don't. Circumstances are not right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
At the particular stage of your life.
Mm-hmm.
For example, you may be a student.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to take up teaching role to finish your school. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, and that's not the main part of your life. You may choose not to become a Dharma teacher if you had the experience. Well, the teacher may ask you to, do some teachings and guide some other people, but all kinds of reasons, like practical reasons. I mean,
So you personally, you had inka prior to Dharma transmission.
So for me, when I used inka, I was 26, I think. 26 for inka. And then subsequently, from Master Sheng Yen, there's no Dharma transmission involved. Back then, he didn't transmit to anyone.
Oh, okay.
And then when he was transmitting to people, I returned to lay life. And he asked me, about Dharma transmission. And I rejected it. I said, I don't need it. What do I need that for? And so he says, okay, that's fine. We'll wait and see in the future. And then before he passed away, he made sure he had some Dharma heirs, someone who can, people who can actually continue the Dharma drum lineage, take up posts and teach and so on. Nothing to do with Kensho or experience of awakening, just people transmitted. 2006, and then he died, a couple years later. And in the beginning of 2009, he wanted to transmit again. So when he asked me, it was early 2000s. I was already out. I was at Princeton doing my graduate schools. And then he contacted some nuns to contact me, but monastic bureaucracy, because he was already very, very sick. In order to protect my teacher, just kind of just wait and see what happens. And so technically, I don't have Dharma transmission.
Okay, I didn't know.
But when I saw him, the monastic institutions kind of prevented it. But when I went to visit him, when I found out he was getting really worse, his health, I went back to Taiwan and I said, Shifu, I'm going to bring back your Western Dharma teachers to the trip, because they haven't seen you since 2006. He stopped coming back to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, okay, come. So when I went to see him a year later, sometime, then he called me to his abbot chamber.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, kneel down. I got a present for you. So he gave me these 2 incense sticks. I don't know if you can see.
I can't.
So one incense stick, it's okay. One incense stick has his calligraphy,
Mm-hmm.
an excerpt from Chan Master Hongzhi's line on silent illumination.
Mm-hmm.
Another incense stick has popular slogan in the Huatou tradition.
Mm-hmm.
He asked me to kneel down, and he gave me those as Xing Wu. Xing Wu means objects of affirmation
Mm-hmm.
or entrustment.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, our lineage of Caodong line, Wingzai line, it was an act of entrustment.
Mm-hmm.
And then he prepared 2 calligraphy couplets, which is
Mm-hmm.
at the Chan Center here,
Mm-hmm.
based on my name, Guogu.
Mm-hmm.
That to me, and he expressed it too,
Mm-hmm.
was even though the bureaucracy of the monastic institution blocked it,
Mm-hmm.
I entrust you with this.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I say when I teach, I'm repaying gratitude to my teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So in repaying gratitude to him,
Mm-hmm.
gave me the responsibility of the Caodong Lingji lines,
Mm-hmm.
these 2 approaches to Chan.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I teach.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's say you get to the point, or maybe you're there now, where you have senior students that you feel are, mature in their practice, and you think can be teachers on their own rights. How would you designate their status or their authority?
No problem.
Uh-huh.
See, the certificate and all that business,
Mm-hmm.
that's an invention in the Song Dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
Chan has never really relied on that.
Mm-hmm.
My students will receive my entrustment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They will, continue the line.
Mm-hmm. Interestingly, Suzuki Roshi's lineage uses similar phraseology. If you're a priest and the Dharma's passed on to you, they call it Dharma transmission. If you're a lay person and the Dharma's passed on to you, they call it Dharma entrustment or lay entrustment. So it's similar. There's similar language there as well.
But even for lay people, he used Dharma transmission.
Oh, okay.
It's just fluid.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's no one-to-one match.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So speaking of awakening, your teacher, I can't remember the name of the book. I'm so sorry.
My teacher's name?
No, his book. I recently read one of his books. I'm spacing the name.
Method of No Method? Shattering the Great Doubt?
Maybe no method of no method. But anyway, but he makes a big point on the differentiation between kind of like, I think what he calls nice experiences and awakening, and how his students often conflate and confuse kind of nice experiences in awakening. I'm curious from your perspective, like, how do you differentiate, what might be a meditation experience, like, like I feel one with everything, or, like, oh my God, that incense burner in me, there's no separation. Or, or like, oh, I'm God, or God is me. Like those. It seems like he would say those types of experiences are not awakening.
Yeah.
Do you think am I describing his point of view correctly? And if so, could you elaborate on the differences between that and awakening, and what you would actually, how you would define awakening, what you're looking for among your own students?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So oneness is not awakening in the Chan tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the word awakening in English is so loosely used, all
Mm-hmm.
tradition, from
Mm-hmm.
New Age to Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
But in Chan, oneness, unification,
Mm-hmm.
inseparability,
Mm-hmm.
is not awakening.
Mm-hmm.
The analogy I have is like a window, spick and span,
Mm-hmm.
polished, clear.
Mm-hmm.
So clear that the birds can't even see it. Run right into fly right into the window. But
Mm-hmm.
something is there.
Mm-hmm.
Something is there. So birds will smash into it. Because
Mm-hmm.
something is there, someone's going to get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? There's repercussions.
Mm-hmm.
Versus no window at all.
Mm-hmm.
No window at all. It's clear. You can see the trees, you can see people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Completely different. Night and day.
Mm-hmm.
Night and day. It's not like different fruit comparing they're both fruit. It's not even a fruit.
Mm-hmm.
So the putting down or the absence of self-referencing,
Mm-hmm.
that's awakening. And flashes of that. In the early days, my teacher congratulated people,
Mm-hmm.
but those don't really count,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that it has no transformative power at all
Mm-hmm.
in the face of vexations. And the self definitely come back,
Mm-hmm.
right? So only substantial ones.
Mm-hmm.
So one again and again and again and again. Now it's not all the same because one's practice is different, the conditions are different.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's not so dramatic. Sometimes it's just, speaking with someone or going about certain things, suddenly slip into the self, just drops away.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's present. Self-referencing is absent.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's, uh, intense practice or just after intense practice,
Mm-hmm.
it can come very powerfully. So all the different shades of how the self-referencing grasping vanishes, the
Mm-hmm.
ways in which they vanish, the conditions to which lead to that.
Mm-hmm.
Through these practices in daily life, the practitioner become more familiar with the, the familiar with the function of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If it's just a glimpse, the person really doesn't have any opportunity. But
Mm-hmm.
if it's like a month, for example,
Mm-hmm.
you're living your life. You're living your life. You're interacting with the world. And there's definitely ups and downs. And there's like argument, you see people, injustice, whatever. In the midst of that, experiencing that without self-referencing, it's a
Mm-hmm.
completely different flavor. So different flavor and depth of awakening. How does one respond to things? In those circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
that's totally different than just on a retreat or at the retreat suddenly a glimpse. Those have no power at all.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So on the one hand, you understand that. On the other hand, you understand more and more exactly how the self-attachment works.
Mm-hmm.
Right? right? When the self is present, when the self is absent, both sides, there's an ever deepening understanding. So when it's present, like when you have tasted and the self is absent, then when it's present, it's very obvious. You know? It's like someone poking you with a thorn. You know, when the self-grasping, you know, very sensitive to it. You know? So under different situations. So these experiences allowed the teacher to help students, help guide, and not to take, you know, meager, small experiences and be self-satisfied, as if it's, you know, like thorough awakening or something. So that's a lot of danger in that. So it's integrated into just Chinese Buddhism, East Asian Buddhism in general. So precepts, you know, meditation, you know, service, which is very important in your tradition. It's all connected, all connected. In the midst of that, how to navigate life ethically. You know, ethics is basically the behavior side of awakening. You know, the experiential side, that may call the essence, but the function, like in real life situation, that's ethics, you know, precepts. And then, you know, for a while there, my teacher wanted me to deepen my samadhi practice after he gave me inka. Why? The three studies are just essential in Buddhism: precept, meditation, wisdom. You can't, they're inseparable. You can't say they're, it's not sequential from the perspective.
They support each other.
Yeah, it's definitely, you know. So how to enter into deep meditative state, familiarize oneself with that process physiologically, you know, energy wise, just you know. So that's the long answer. But short answer, totally different. And even within awakening, the experience of it, totally different, you know, from a shallow one to, you know, some substantial ones.
So speaking of you know, depth of awakening, looking back at your teacher's life, do you feel he was ever caught by vexations, or do you think he was transcended that?
Yes, I saw him with vexations. Yeah, but very, very quickly. That's the mark of practitioner, Buddhist practitioner. He never saw himself as, I'm the teacher, you know. He always said, I'm a practitioner. We're practitioners. So he was very humble. So, you know, us students, we do all kinds of stupidity things that just piss him off sometimes. Most time it doesn't get to him. You know? But because I was very close to him, I was always
You were his
with him.
attendant, right?
I was his attendant, so I'm always with him 24/7, you know. So I got to see, very rarely, but I got to see vexations when he comes. But he's always very quick.
Was he married, or was he like a full monastic?
Full monastic.
Yeah.
Full monastic. Yeah, he was a bhikshu. Bhikshu or bhikkhu.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, in Japan, we have they have the bodhisattva precepts, you know, which are a lot smaller, and you know, and that led to the ability eventually of monks being able to marry. But it seems like in Chinese traditions, they've kept the full precepts as an institution even up to present day. Am I understanding that correctly? Yeah.
Yes, the full monastic ordination precept. On top of that, we received the bodhisattva precepts.
I see. And was he a vegetarian?
Yeah, all Chinese Buddhist monks basically vegetarian.
Hmm. Yeah.
If they're not, then they're breaking precepts.
Right. If he went to like a donor's house who accidentally served him meat, would he eat it to not offend them, or do you think he would just be like, "Sorry, it's I'm not, I can't eat it."
Now, that was my job as attendant to make sure he doesn't even find himself in that
Okay.
situation.
Yeah.
So those situations, I mean, hypothetically,
Hmm.
well, realistically, it
Hmm.
never happened.
Hmm.
Otherwise, I'm not doing my job.
Right.
Hypothetically,
Yeah.
I think he would not eat.
Would not eat. Hmm. Yeah.
He studied the precepts. That's
Hmm.
one of his. So he was steeped into the Vinaya. So that was
Hmm.
like in terms of like personal study of scriptures and so on.
Hmm.
He studied the precepts and early teachings.
Hmm.
He spent a lot of time, so he's very familiar with
Hmm.
you know lesser vehicle precept,
Hmm.
greater vehicle precept, Mahayana precept. Very familiar.
Hmm.
So he would never. So I don't want to hurt your feelings. Let me eat the meat.
Yeah.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. So in your own life, you are technically disrobed, correct? You're a lay person. Yeah.
Yes,
And do you, not to be too personal, but are you married or have kids or anything like that?
I have married.
Yeah.
I'm married and I have 2 kids.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Do that.
Following my teacher's instruction,
Mhm.
he's
Yeah.
told me,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
do
And then
that.
you're a professor of religion at is it Florida State University? I know I said it in my introduction.
Yeah,
Um,
Florida State.
yeah. And could you talk a little bit about how um, you don't go by your Dharma name when you're a professor, correct?
No,
Yeah. And so do most of your students, are they aware you're a Dharma teacher as well? Or are those just, or do those two aspects of your lives intersect at all?
um, some students know, some students don't.
Hmm.
Most students, they just in their own world, they're just taking some liberal arts credit,
Hmm.
and then but so they don't really get to know me.
Hmm.
So it's just Professor Yu.
So you don't announce it in class or anything like that? Yeah.
No. Sometimes they Google me and they find out
Hmm.
everything,
Hmm.
my punk rock days and all
Yeah.
that stuff. But
Uh-huh. Yeah. And do any of your scholastic students, do they ever kind of make the jump over and be meditation students? Has that ever happened?
rarely,
Hmm.
rarely.
Yeah.
Undergraduates are more open. They're
Hmm.
just in a time of their stage of their life, and they're exploring things, and they wander into Tallahassee Chan Center,
Hmm.
or they Google me. They found out the
Hmm.
reason they took Buddhist tradition classes because they have personal interests. So
Hmm.
some of them they come.
Hmm.
Most of the grad students, they're just inundated with graduate school.
Hmm.
They don't have time to do that. So
Yeah.
that's one reason probably, but usually they're just academically inclined,
Hmm.
so they don't cross over.
Hmm. What's the demographic like at your temple or your Dharma center? Sorry, are you seeing like kind of middle-aged people, younger people, baby boomers, kind of a mix? What is kind of, what would you say like the average makeup is of your sangha there?
Yeah. So Tallahassee, it's the capital of Florida.
Hmm.
It's also a college town,
Hmm.
right? So we have several. So that makes the demographics
Hmm.
a little different than other center that's just in regular cities.
Hmm.
So we have young folks, college students.
Hmm.
I would say 25%,
Oh, that's great.
30%. And
Hmm.
then we have the least age range, which is the age range in which normally people develop their career, which is
Hmm.
30 to 40, 26 to 36. That's when people just stages of their life, they're getting
Hmm.
married, they get a career. That's the least. That's probably 5%,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah,
And then
that's
the rest is
interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting because that was probably from like age 31 until like 37. That was the period where I did my least intense practice, and that's because I was having young kids, and and I mean, I still consider myself a practitioner, but my formal practice definitely suffered during that period, and it's just having kids and developing career, it's really hard to maintain an intense practice. Yeah.
It's just practical kind of phases of human developmental stages,
Mm-hmm.
And then the last portion is 40s, 50s, 60s,
Mm-hmm.
We have a couple of late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
There are regulars, but
Mm-hmm.
mostly like the people that come on retreats, do intensive practice,
Mm-hmm.
40s, 50s,
Mm-hmm.
maybe late 50s, or early 60s. Yeah.
How much of it
And
do you
then
think is that they have? How much of it do you think is they have more leisure time versus they're getting older and the reality of impermanence is kind of setting in, so they're feeling a little more urgency in their practice? Do you think it's that or some combination, or what do you think?
I think it's just a complex
Mm-hmm.
reasoning causes of
Mm-hmm.
patterns of um, human life development,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and you know maybe imminence of death or sickness. People have some suffering. They have a right dosage of trouble in their life, and by the time they're 40s, they also experience negative things that kind of led them to seek something more
Mm-hmm.
about life.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
and then the young people are just on retreat. They just gung ho. They want to
Mm-hmm.
practice. They're very interested.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so mixed.
So if you have younger students who are really gung ho, do you recommend residential monastic training for them? Is there a place where you send them, or how does that work? Or has that not come up yet?
Um, Sometimes see among those people that actually do retreats,
Mm-hmm.
intensive retreats.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if they are not in town, they after they graduate or if they're free, they move here and
Mm-hmm.
they try to do as many retreats as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I generally encourage them to experience life,
Mm-hmm.
get a job and to experience life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Dharma Drum headquarter mountain in Taiwan,
Mm-hmm.
if it was more suitable for Westerners,
Mm-hmm.
I would send them.
Mm-hmm.
It's just too culturally embedded in the language barrier and all that. It's just
Yeah.
it's not ideal. It's not ideal. So because we have 5 acres, I will develop residency program.
Oh, that's in your plans.
So that's the plan.
Yeah. Great.
A kind of intergenerational
Mm-hmm.
program.
Mm-hmm.
Merging with the trend of tiny homes in
Mm-hmm.
America. We have the acreage, and that's our next phase for the Tallahassee Chan Center. So
Mm-hmm.
this would be most ideal. They would live here,
Mm-hmm.
work here, and also maybe they can get a job if they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
So to deepen their practice, and also it's very important for Dharma Center to actually consider this,
Mm-hmm.
and that is for those Dharma centers that don't have residency programs,
Mm-hmm.
at least consider like a full-time staff of these younger folks, because it is during that time
Mm-hmm.
the transition of their life, like they graduate from college, they're still figuring out what they want to do. It's
Mm-hmm.
a very good time to stay in a monastery a year, 2 years, 3 years to get
Mm-hmm.
that experience while they figure out what they want to do.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Like, yeah, like
Yeah.
realistically,
Yeah.
And then so the foundation is more solid before they go out to the real world, like manipulation, jobs and all that stuff. But, so having that space for them is very important. So this is what we're trying to do, But I also want to do it intergenerationally. So I want to use that 5 acres to support Buddhist teachers or seasoned practitioners who are aged, elderly, and they don't have much financial support. I welcome them here.
Okay, I'll be calling you in about 20 years.
Come. It's a real problem because second generation, third generation teachers, they're Dharma teachers. They don't make money.
Yeah.
So they can't really afford these living assisted homes. It's like they can't. Yet they have to step down to let next generation teacher come. So it's like they're in this limbo.
Yeah.
So I want to provide this experimental place in which they can come here.
Yeah.
To interact with young folks here.
San Francisco Zen Center in cooperation with some other organization, I'm not sure which one. I think they started, I don't know if they started it or in the process of Enso Village, but I hear it's very expensive.
I know it's too expensive. What we're doing is completely different.
Yeah.
It's donation based.
Yeah.
You have to be rich to live there. Of course, if you're a resident teacher, okay, free, live there. But it's just like other senior citizen homes. You have to have money. So taking care of the elderly sector of our society is very important. And we begin with the Buddhist society in North America. So that's what I want to do. That's Dharma Relief 3.
Okay.
DR3. DR2 is racial healing. DR1 is COVID-19 masks for hospitals. So that's the socially engaged organization that I established.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that in our kind of pre-interview discussion. Will you talk about the second stage? I thought that would be really interesting for people to hear about.
So DR1, a prelude to that. DR1 during COVID, filling that gap of U.S. manufacturers of masks not meeting the actual demand. Remember that? Like automobile factories start to make masks.
Right, yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So, and then China, U.S. relations wasn't, that good. So we just went directly to China. Prior to the COVID-19, China was a producer for over half of the globe's PPEs. So they have well-established, FDA-approved, manufacturers and so on. So they were shipping to different places except U.S. Our administration and so on. So we just went directly. We raised funds. Intersectarian, all Buddhist traditions come together. Raise funds, and send directly these boxes directly. So we bypass, like shipping crates and checking the content. So it's directly to the hospitals. So we have this network of Dharma teachers and centers. And then George Floyd happened right at the end of that. And then that kind of segued, changed DR, Dharma Relief. We was coming to a close, DR1, and then segue into racial healing. Something we should, since we had this grassroots network of Dharma centers, teachers already, I felt we have to do something, kind of jump to get on the bandwagon while it's still warm and hot to draw the momentum. So we gathered different Dharma teachers, the R2s for racial healing, but it can't be led by non-Black Dharma teachers. Right? So at the core of the new board, advisory board, We have
Mm-hmm.
Black Dharma teachers.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And because we met through Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
we don't have a personal relationship. So
Mm-hmm.
it took a long time to get to know one another, to develop trust, kind of
Mm-hmm.
grind against each other. But we're in a good place now.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're doing is raise fund,
Mm-hmm.
set a goal, develop fellowships
Mm-hmm.
to support Black Dharma teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's inspired by universal base salary. Not exactly that, but so they would get duration of 12 months every month,
Mm-hmm.
no question asked, $500 or however much we'll decide that.
Mm-hmm.
And to support their Dharma work, traveling or the book they want to write or buffer for their income.
Mm-hmm.
So Black Dharma teachers,
Great.
there's a burgeoning, cohort
Mm-hmm.
of Black Dharma teachers.
Yeah.
Some from Vipassana, some from Zen,
Mm-hmm.
some from Tibetan Buddhist traditions. So
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter, just
Mm-hmm.
Dharma practitioners, Dharma teachers. So that we're currently coming up with the process of application. Like, what does that entail?
Mm-hmm.
Once that's done, we'll announce it through Lion's Roar, Tricycle, all the different Buddha Dharma magazines,
Mm-hmm.
and all the network that we had, the DR1, to saturate this news. And then we'll gather the applicants for the fellowship. And then, it'll run this course.
Great. And then phase 3 will be the community you're developing, the residential community.
Yeah, so this program, DR2, will come to a conclusion maybe 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the end of that. Meanwhile, I've already begun the foundations, or the beginning conceptualization of DR3, which is evergreen community.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
An intergenerational community of retired Dharma teachers,
Mm-hmm.
senior practitioners, and just the community here, young college kids and the practitioners. So some kind of way for them to interact. That's my critique to kind of senior citizen homes.
Mm-hmm.
You get those old people together, put them together, tuck it away, out of sight, out of mind. So I wanted to reintroduce this family community model in which the young and the elderly are actually interacting. It's much more healthier. And besides that, it would be great just to have a group of seasoned practitioners, practicing together.
If someone wanted to donate towards this project, where would they go? Where would they find out about it?
Yeah, DR3 is not.
No, I mean just even phase 2. If someone wanted to donate to that, where would they go for that?
Yeah, if someone Google Dharma Relief, they would discover how to donate. Right? You can donate generally to Dharma Relief. You can donate to DR2, racial healing. So please help. This is such a worthy project that's going to hopefully make a little bit of impact on the landscape of North American Buddhism, the development.
And I know our local Sangha was involved with relocating an Afghani family to Sacramento. And I know my understanding was it was through your organization or through your efforts. What was that part of? Was that through Dharma Relief or a different organization?
That's just through Tallahassee Chan Center.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not formally, Dharma Relief.
Okay.
That's just, when the Afghanistan, when we pulled our U.S. troops back, and then the Taliban basically just, they just freeze people's bank accounts, and then changed back to the old ways, and then people fled.
Mm-hmm.
And America has hundreds of thousands of Afghanistan. So they just distributed to different cities, different states. And we got, at that time when we began, we got about 175 people.
Mm-hmm.
And the International Rescue Committee
Mm-hmm.
was take care of their housing, basic need. But the housings are really bad, and the basic jobs are like menial, minimum wage jobs. Meanwhile, they have like 5 kids,
Right.
sometimes 2 kids. The husband, you can't live on that. So we're trying to. So IRC,
Mm-hmm.
International Rescue Service Community, rely on churches.
Mm-hmm.
They see us as a church, the Dharma Center,
Right.
to work directly with the Afghanistan. So when sometimes they travel. So when they travel to California, I contacted your organization, you
Mm-hmm.
know, like a branch of it,
Mm-hmm.
Um, so my contacts, I see if they can kind of help out.
Yeah. Apparently, it's been really, yeah, it's awesome you guys are doing that. So if somebody, let's say somebody watches this video and they feel a resonance with your approach to Dharma, my understanding you're pretty maxed out on students. Is that right? I mean,
It's not a matter of maxed out.
uh-huh.
It's just a matter of I like things to develop organically,
Right.
like friends.
Mhm. But
So
if somebody
building
contacted,
relationships.
the Tallahassee Chan Center, I mean, is there room for them to go out and practice and attend
Oh, of
retreats?
course,
Okay.
of course, of course. Our center is open to everyone. I go to Europe, I lead retreats there.
Mhm.
There's a lot of people that practice,
Mhm.
but formal teacher-student relationship comes at least
Mhm.
practice with me on intensive retreats.
Mhm.
So I actually get to know the person.
Right. Right.
They come to know me and see if there's a karmic affinity there. So
Mhm.
just slowly evolve. But the center, I mean, and the retreats that I lead, I just offer my life to them, and
Mhm.
what I have. They come to retreats, so definitely we welcome people to come to Tallahassee.
Great. Yeah, I'll include information on that in the description of the podcast. So I want to be respectful of your time. This has been kind of a
Okay,
long interview. Is there anything else you wanted to cover or talk about before we go, or we could always do a part two in the future?
maybe part two, but
Okay.
for now,
Okay.
I wish you the best and thank you for sharing all this information,
Yeah.
creating this podcast for everyone.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.